Hello, this is the May 17, 2010 issue of United Nations Week, News and Views. I'm John Kerry, and the views expressed on this program are mine alone unless I indicate some other source. The purpose of the program is to bring to your attention developments in recent days at the UN that you probably will not come across any other place, and also to present to you some views that I hope will cause you to react by sending along your own views to an address that I will provide later on. First of all, I want to talk about how the UN is scrutinizing Arizona's recent laws that have been so much in the news, whereby police officers are supposed to look over individuals they come across, and if they think they could possibly be illegal immigrants, to demand proof of their status. Well, there are 6 human rights experts at the UN, and they have given their own opinion about this Arizona legislation. And they say, quote, "A disturbing pattern of legislative activity hostile to ethnic minorities and immigrants has been established with the adoption of an immigration law for police action targeting individuals on the basis of their perceived ethnic origin," unquote. Notice they don't say national origin. Ethnic origin isn't really quite correct, because there are plenty of persons in the United States legally who are by ethnicity Latino or Latina. Well, here are the names and countries of origin of the 6 experts. Jorge Bustamante of Mexico, whose specialty is human rights of migrants. Jitu Maui of Kenya, whose responsibilities are concerned with racism, discrimination, and xenophobia. James Anaya of the U.S., who works on the subject of indigenous people. Farida Shahid of Pakistan, cultural rights. Vernor Munoz Villalobos of Costa Rica, education. And Gay McDougall of the U.S., who works on minority issues. These experts also said, quote, "States are required to respect and ensure the human rights of all persons subject to their jurisdiction without discrimination. Relevant international standards require that detention be used only as an exceptional measure, justified, narrowly tailored, and proportional to each individual case, and that it be subject to judicial review," unquote. The experts also expressed concern about the enactment of a law prohibiting Arizona's school programs featuring histories and cultures of ethnic minorities, because everyone has the right to learn about his own cultural and linguistic heritage. What strikes me as unusual about these condemnations is that they are not aimed at a sovereign member of the United Nations, but at a component part of such a member, the United States. I do not remember having seen in the past criticism coming from the United Nations directed at a component part of a state member. The United States as such is not addressed at all by these experts, or even referred to, so far as I can tell. Now I turn to the lack of any contest in the May 13th election by the General Assembly of 14 countries to membership in the Human Rights Council. Nominations by each of the 5 geographical regions had been limited by each group to the number of seats available to that group for election. African states were allowed to elect 4. That was their quota. And so they nominated 4, and those 4 obviously were elected: Angola, Libya, Mauritania, and Uganda. The same happened in Asia, where there were 4 seats up, and Malaysia, Maldives, Qatar, and Thailand were elected. Eastern Europe had 2 possible seats to fill, and so Poland and Moldova were nominated and elected. Ecuador and Guatemala were elected from the Latin America and Caribbean region, which was entitled to 2 seats. Finally, the Western Europe and other group, which is the one the United States belongs to, was entitled to elect 2 people, so we nominated 2, and they were elected, of course, Spain and Switzerland. Now, U.S. Ambassador Susan Rice told the press on May 13th in answer to a question about Iran's unsuccessful campaign for a seat on the council, quote, "Obviously, our strong view is that when there are competitive slates for elections to bodies from various regional groupings, that increases the potential for a strong slate to emerge as the ultimate elected slate," unquote. She evidently meant that it was competition within the Asian group that forced Iran out of a candidacy. She played down Iran's subsequent election to the Commission on Status of Women, explaining that, quote, "Iran has served for the most part on that body for over 20 years, for the better part of 20 years. Says she, this was not something new that they were elected unopposed, and we think, in light of Iran's record on human rights and women's rights in particular, that is an unfortunate outcome," close quote. Well, I agree with her that if there's competition within each group, that is, if each group would nominate more candidates than there are seats allotted to that group, there would be real competition, because then the voting would take place in the entire General Assembly. 192 states would be voting. But when there's a regional group composed of, say, 10 countries, and they nominate only one candidate for election, of course, the jockeying for ascendancy takes place only within that group, and that's not what she seems to be talking about. Well, we in the United States can hardly complain about the lack of healthy competition in the voting for seats on the Human Rights Council, because that's exactly how we got elected. The technique of nominating only the number to be elected, at least makes it possible if the geographical group is willing for all countries eventually to sit on the council, no matter what their own human rights record may be. Now, there's another possible symptom of the desire of companies not to agitate each other, and that is how the Universal Periodic Review operates. We, U.S., will be scrutinized in that process later this year. Decisions adopted by the Council on the, quote, "outcome of the Universal Periodic Review," unquote, are uniformly insignificant. The last half dozen that have come to hand all contain one operative paragraph identical to each other except for the name of the country involved and the citations of documents mentioned. For instance, the, quote, "decision adopted by the Human Rights Council," unquote, on Eritrea contains this sole single operative paragraph, quote, and this is the Council speaking, "adopts the outcome of the Universal Periodic Review on Eritrea, which is constituted of the report of the Working Group on Eritrea, together with the views of Eritrea concerning the recommendations and or conclusions, as well as its voluntary commitments and its replies presented before the adoption of the outcome by the plenary to questions or issues that were not sufficiently addressed during the interactive dialogue in the Working Group," unquote. Now, similarly, meaningless language appears in the Council's, quote, "decisions," unquote, on Cyprus, Dominican Republic, Cambodia, Norway, and Albania. Does this mean that Universal Periodic Review has no useful function? No, I don't think so. Since the exchanges that have already taken place before the Council's, quote, "decisions" require each country in turn to at least listen to what others think of it, provided that the notion of live and let live does not preclude specifics.